We're going to start off the semester talking about what personality actually is. So, traditionally, personality has been thought of as the mask that people wear. In fact, the root word of personality is persona, which refers to a social mask. That is an older definition of personality, and we think about personality a lot differently these days. So, what exactly is personality now? Funder, the author of your textbook, refers to personality as an individual's characteristic patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior, and together with the psychological mechanisms, whether these are mechanisms that are hidden or not hidden, behind those patterns. So, characteristic patterns means that personality represents feelings, thoughts, and behaviors as they come together, and then in the ways that these patterns of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are stable and relatively consistent. The term psychological mechanisms refers to the why of the existence of those patterns. So, in other words, personality is what makes people unique. And personality is also relatively consistent. That means that there is some commonality in your personality over time, but a lot can change. Now, an important point I want to make before we move forward is that the study of personality is not the same as the study of personality traits. Often you will hear people talking about traits, and this is not the only way to define personality. Looking at personality traits is just one model. And the definition provided by Funder tends to conflate personality with traits. So I want to make sure that we know to separate those two. Also, the textbook is kind of organized around personality traits being the main way personality is researched, and this is not the case. So let's look at a more comprehensive definition of personality by two other psychologists. McAdams and Pels suggest that we should think about personality as a system with multiple levels, and they describe personality as a developing pattern of dispositional traits. Disposition means like character, relatively stable traits, characteristic adaptations, so how we adapt to our circumstances, and self-defining life narratives, complexly and differentially situated in culture and social context. So basically that means we also have stories of ourselves, and these stories are complex and they are differentially situated in the culture that we are part of, the society that we are part of, and our own social identities. What is personality psychology? So we've talked about personality, but what is personality psychology? It's not like we have a department or an area of the psychology department that is just devoted to examining personality. Why is that? Well, personality psychology aims to look at the whole person. So it spans many subfields of psychology. A personality psychologist is usually situated in social psychology or clinical psychology. And there is some overlap between personality and clinical psychology because personality psychologists study the normal patterns of the self, whereas clinical psychology studies the extreme or unusual patterns that cause problems in personality. What are some normal traits that are problems in the extreme? Well, as you'll learn, conscientiousness is all about planning and perfectionism. And if that is taken to the extreme, you might have somebody who develops obsessive compulsive personality disorder, as one example. So much of personality is about how you interact with others and how you interact with your environment. For that reason, personality psychologists are sometimes situated in social psychology. But really, personality psychologists straddle all of the subfields. So including not just social and clinical, but also biological psychology, developmental psychology, and cognitive psychology. Because personality is based on the idea that every person is like all persons, but every person is also just somewhat like other persons, and at the same time not like any other person, we need to look at personality in a comprehensive way. And we can't do this by looking at all aspects of personality at once. We need to limit ourselves to certain kinds of observations or certain kinds of patterns or certain ways of thinking about these patterns. So personality psychology can be organized around what we call several different paradigms. And you can think of a paradigm as just meaning a basic approach or a theoretical model of personality that focuses on some phenomena and ignores other phenomena. It's a way to limit what part of personality or what personality process is examined so that the task of personality psychology is not completely overwhelming and impossible. So some of the paradigms include the trait paradigm. So the trait approach looks at how people differ psychologically and how these differences might be conceptualized, how these differences might be measured and followed over time. Biological approaches look at the biological mechanisms that underlie personality. So this could include anatomy, so regions of the brain, physiology or biochemistry, genetics, and even evolutionary psychology. The latter we won't focus on in this course. Additional paradigms. So the psychoanalytic approach focuses on unconscious processes and how you can experience internal mental conflict without even realizing it. The humanistic approach focuses on the opposite. It focuses on consciousness rather than unconsciousness. It focuses on things that characterize humans like creativity and free will and happiness. Cross-cultural personality recognizes that the very definition of personality might shift depending on the culture at play. The idea of a self is very Western and individualistic, and this isn't necessarily the case for all cultures. So cross-cultural personality psychology looks at how reality and conscious experience vary across different cultures. Finally, we have the learning or cognitive paradigm. This can involve looking at personality from a number of different perspectives. So if we're operating from a classic behaviorism paradigm, we're interested in how specific behaviors are increased or decreased based on the rewards or punishments that people experience. If we're operating from a more social learning perspective, then the focus is on how personality comes about as a result of modeling and observation of others. And a cognitive perspective focuses more on inner thoughts and memories and how these influence or characterize how we see ourselves. Are these paradigms competitors or complements? It's important to note that these paradigms are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they are not different answers to the same question. Instead, they're just completely different questions. Another way to say this is that the different sections of the book are not really about different competing accounts of the same phenomena. Rather, each approach discusses different phenomena. So trait approaches say nothing about dreams or internal mental conflict, and psychoanalysts barely mention learning, and humanistic psychology doesn't even acknowledge biology. So while each is unique and helpful in their focus on a particular part of psychology, personality specifically, they each also ignore many issues. And so you can't just look through the lens of one paradigm. You have to consider all of them. In this course, we're going to engage in other ways of exploring personality. So we're going to examine how aspects of personality are assessed. How do I know who I am? And how do I know who you are? We're going to explore how personality relates to important life outcomes. We're also going to understand how personality changes over time, whether as a result of development or intentional personality change. And finally, we're going to study the extremes of personality. In our very last class session, we're going to focus on personality disorders.